Hello, welcome to another virtual program from Maine Historical Society. I'm Kathleen Newman. It is March 18th, 2025, and this is the Gardner Heist with Ulrich Boser. Before we get into the program itself, let's just take a moment to remember that Maine Historical Society recognizes that what is currently referred to as Maine is Wabanaki homelands, a place that Wabanaki people have stewarded for over 13,000 years. Wherever we are in Maine, we are on Wabanaki homelands. We recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Abenaki, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations within these lands and waters. Understanding Wabanaki history is vital to understanding Maine, and we are committed to helping provide education about this history through partnerships with Wabanaki people. So it may be hard for some of us to believe, but it was 35 years ago today, March 18th, 1990, that just after midnight, two men broke into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston and committed the largest art heist in history, stealing a dozen masterpieces, including one Vermeer, three Rembrandts, and five Degas. After thousands of leads, hundreds of interviews, and a $5 million reward, not a single painting has been recovered. Worth as much as $500 million, the missing masterpieces have become sort of the holy grail of the art world, and their theft has become one of the nation's most extraordinary unsolved mysteries. And joining us today to talk about this story is best-selling author Ulrich Boser. Now, previously, he was a contributing editor for U.S. News and World Report. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Press. And in February 2009, HarperCollins published his book, The Gardner Heist, which examines this 1990 theft of a dozen masterpieces from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. He joins us today. Thank you, Ulrich, so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Great. I'm just going to jump right in. So yeah, here to discuss my book on the Isabella Stewart Gardner art heist. As Kathleen mentioned, the case begins simply enough in the early morning hours of March 18th, 1990 in Boston, Massachusetts. A light rain had fallen earlier that day. The streets were wet and slick. It was St. Patrick's Day, one of the biggest party nights of the year in the city, and some drunken revelers were stumbling their way home. Shortly after midnight, two men arrived at the side entrance of the Gardner Museum. The men were thieves, and they were dressed as police officers, and they had the full uniforms, complete with badges, hats, and those little, pins that cops wear in their lapels. The men told the night guard that they were investigating a disturbance, and the night guard buzzed them inside. The thief stepped into one of the most beautifully romantic museums in the world. This is an image, Kathleen, if you don't mind, the next slide. This is an image of the museum's inner courtyard. Isabella Stewart Gardner was this spirited society woman, the Jacqueline Kennedy of her day, and she saw art as something very personal, very intimate, a moment of truth and beauty to be celebrated and worshipped. Gardner collected thousands of works of art, including masterpieces by Botticelli, Velázquez, Rubens, Raphael, and she designed the museum to show off her works. Gardner loved Venice, and she built this museum as a replica of a Venetian palazzo. You can see here in this slide, her brilliant twist was to turn the palazzo style inside out. So what would typically overlook the canals of Venice now oversees, as you see, this dazzling courtyard with these soaring balconies. Critics have called it one of the most romantic places in the city of Boston. Gardner was exacting about her museum. She had the facade altered multiple times. She had the main staircase put up and then taken down again. The museum really was her own work of art. And she wrote in her will that nothing should ever be changed, not the Michelangelo prints, not the locket of Robert Browning's hair. And at least until midnight that night, it was a wish faithfully kept. The thieves bound the guards, and they looted the museum for over an hour. They stole a dozen masterpieces, Degas, Rembrandts, Vermeer. The thieves stole the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the old master's only seascape. The thieves also stole Vermeer the Concert, one of only 36 paintings by the Dutch artist. As Kathleen mentioned, the Gardner robbery is the world's largest art heist. It is also the biggest burglary in American history. Today, the paintings are valued somewhere as much as 500 or more million dollars. And the Gardner Museum itself has long offered a $10 million reward. That is the largest reward ever offered by a private institution. But in the 20 years since the heist has occurred, not a single person has been arrested, not a single painting has been recovered. The case has become one of the nation's most extraordinary unsolved crimes. There have been novels, poems, plays, movies, paintings, all devoted to the theft, all in an attempt to figure out what happened that evening. And mystery is really at the heart of the case. What makes people come back to this caper again and again. It's unsolved, it's an unknown, and that's really powerful. So let's consider for a moment Vermeer's The Concert. Uh, Next slide, please. So this is the concert, one of the stolen works. Vermeer created this in 1664, and as you see, features a man and two women playing music together. And it's a remarkable work for many reasons. First, there's this sheer craftsmanship, and that large orange patch in the center really draws your eyes right in. It's also, if you look at the tiles, I mean, it's really impressive the way that he created these tiles to create a sense of depth and perspective. But I think what makes this work of art really a masterpiece is the fact that it is itself a mystery. It's a narrative unknown. You're never really sure what's happening in the painting. What is the relationship between the man and these two women? Are they just playing music together? Is there something sexual? Vermeer gives some clues in the upper right-hand corner. You can see here, he painted a work by Van Buren called The Procuress. It features a man soliciting a woman for sex. Vermeer knew the Procuress well. His mother-in-law, in fact, owned that painting. So why did Vermeer paint this painting within the painting? Did he want to talk about how base human instincts undermine music and art? Or is really the concert about the balance between the two, the harmony between sex and lust and truth and beauty? I don't know, but I believe that this painting gives no definitive answer. There's no clear solution. Like the Gardner case itself, you can go back to it again and again. I first got involved in the Gardner case in December 2004. I began working on a magazine story about art detective Harold Smith. Next slide, please. This is a photo of Harold Smith. He was remarkably successful at his job. Over the course of his career, he had recovered lost Renoirs, exposed Da Vinci's. He cracked the country's largest gold robbery. And Smith worked the Gardner Heist for years, incredibly devoted to the case. He ran down lead after lead, all while skin cancer ravaged his body. He wore an eye patch, a prosthetic nose, and a bowler cap to cover up these terrible and painful wounds that he had. But within weeks of our meeting, Smith passed away, and after his death, I really just decided to pick up where he left off and try and search for these lost paintings. What surprised me the most as I got involved was just simply the size of the art underworld. Art theft has become one of the world's most lucrative illegal activities. Experts believe it's a $6 billion illegal business. And it's a serious and growing problem. Organized crime is increasingly getting involved in the trafficking of stolen art. So are terrorist groups, looting of Iraqi museums after the US-led invasion, widely believed to have helped fund the terrorist groups. Part of the problem is just simply the value of art. I mean, it's just incredible the amount of money paid for canvases. So let's consider for a moment this Klimt painting. The next slide, please. This Klimt painting, Adele Blocher-Bauer 1, in 2006, Ronald Lauder paid for this painting $135 million. And no doubt it's an incredible work of art, beautiful twists and turns, gold foil gives us real radiance to the canvas. But just for imagine in a moment, just a world without money, right? If we still worked on a bartering system, because with the same amount of money, 135 million, Lauder could have purchased a mid-sized computer firm, right? The same year, technology giant Cisco bought a mid-tech company for 135 million. He also could have made this blockbuster movie. Next slide, please. The upfront budget for the movie Pearl Harbor was $130 million in 2006. That means he could have traded the painting for the film. And I will admit, Pearl Harbor, not Ben Affleck's best movie, but he would have still had enough money left over to buy an enormous mansion. And this is really key, right? The amount of money being spent on art is really key to understanding art theft because the value of art is really what attracts criminals. Money is what really inspires them to steal art. Because for the most of the part, these are run-of-the-mill crooks. They're aging drug dealers, out-of-work bank robbers, they're ex-cons looking to pay the rent. And they steal art because they want the cash, because paintings and sculptures are often incredibly valuable objects. Thieves often steal because it's just simply easy. Consider the Gardner Museum. At the time of the theft, the museum was not well protected, and it was really only protected by the store. This is the old side entrance of the museum, the one that the thieves came through. And the night of the thefts, the museum had two poorly trained guards, one of whom later admitted to smoking marijuana on the job. He didn't even spell the word guard correctly on his application. And the museum had some motion detectors and a panic button, but that was about it. Museum security is notoriously weak, and I want to make clear that the Gardner wasn't even particularly bad for its time and place. And in fact, one could argue that their security was really average for about that time. Blame lack of funds, blame a belief in the sanctity of art, but many museums simply don't do enough to protect their treasures. Thieves once stole Munch's The Scream from a museum in Norway, and they left behind a note that said simply, "Thanks for the poor security." So I really want to be clear, there's nothing romantic about art theft. There are no real-world Pierce Brosnans, there are no real-world Cary Grants. The crooks don't wear black turtlenecks, they don't dance through red lasers. There is no Dr. No or Mr. Big, some millionaire in a mansion in the Caribbean who, late at night puts on some tuxedo and goes down to his basement with a snifter of scotch, right? No one has ever found evidence of this kind of Dr. No, Mr. Big. It's not to say, of course, that wealthy individuals don't have deep passion for art. Gardner herself once joked about murdering someone over a painting. Andrew Carnegie once referred to his art collection as mania. But well-heeled collectors don't buy works that are obviously stolen. Just never seen evidence for that. Now, for their part, thieves continue to believe that this Dr. No exists, that this Mr. Big exists. In 2007, thieves used little more than a crowbar to steal a Picasso from a museum in Brazil. A suspect in that later told the authorities that he was sure that a Saudi oil sheik was going to buy the work. You see, if thieves really understood the art market, they wouldn't steal world famous paintings. Instead, they would try and take advantage of the fact that the art is the world's largest unregulated market in the world. So they might steal something of much lower value, like a Ming vase. There are thousands of them. You need an expert to tell one from another. So you could steal one in New York and then sell it in Tokyo. And we occasionally see that. There are some crooks who try and take advantage of this middle part of the market. But that's not generally what happens. Consider again the Gardner case. We know the thieves were expert criminals. They knew how to use handcuffs to tie up the guards. They didn't brandish handguns or scream or appear edgy like a first timer might. But in many ways, the thieves really had no idea what they were stealing. In a museum filled with masterpieces, with works like Renaissance paintings, Titian's Rape of Europa, they stole five Degas sketches. Next slide, please. So they stole these sketches, despite, they could have stolen a Titian. And let's be clear, these crooks were not obsessed with Degas, or they would have tried to pilfer this stunning portrait of Degas in the Yellow Room. And they're only a few feet from a canvas when they stole the Monet. Thieves also stole a finial, the top of a flagpole. You can find one on eBay for about $10. Next slide, please. But worst of all, the thieves also cut two Rembrandts from their frames. If the thieves had ever taken a drawing class in high school, they would know that this could potentially destroy the works of art forever. I ended up working the Gardner case for years, evaluated numerous leads, spoke to countless people, hired a private investigator once, helped me shadow suspects, visited maximum security prisons to talk with jailed mobsters. And you can blame the art, you can blame the mystery, but this case really has this deep and seducing power. You hear about the heist, the painting, and suddenly you're really just hunting for the art. You're trying to crack this museum riddle. So who stole the Gardner art? I mean, that's question number one, right? I mean, after we hear about it, who do we think stole it? And when law enforcement arrived at the museum the morning after the heist, the name on everyone's lips was Miles Connor. Next slide, please. This is a photo of Miles. He was a Mayflower descendant, a member of Mensa, and for a long time he headed up a rock and roll band called Miles and the Wild Ones. This is a promotional shot from one of those gigs. But Connor was also this shrewd criminal, one of New England's most infamous art thieves. He pocketed Dutch old master paintings, he swiped Japanese statues. He also robbed the Smithsonian in D.C. and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. When police once raided one of his apartments, it took multiple vans to cart away all the stolen art. And while, you know, Connor was debonair and dynamic, in many ways a gentleman thief, he was also a very dangerous and very cruel criminal. Authorities arrested him for murdering a police officer. A jury did find him not guilty. Prosecutors also fingered Connor for helping to murder two teenage girls. Died in the most gruesome way. Screwdrivers were struck through their temples. Connor led police to the bodies, but again, got off on that charge. Now, as for the Gardner case, Connor could not have robbed the museum that evening for one simple reason. He was the night of the heft was night of the heist, sleeping in a Chicago prison. He was in jail for another art theft charge. I interviewed Connor, and today he says that he once planned to rob the museum, that he would often go there late at night. He also says that he knows the identities of the two men, that they were associates of his, but he denies, of course, having a real role. Now, my bottom line with Miles Connor is that you can't cross him off the list. He certainly could have given tips on how to steal, to associate. He had, but he also had plenty of time to return the art. He's been offered immunity deals, and today I really doubt he knows where the art is. Another person whose name often comes up, next slide, please, is Whitey Bulger. At the time of the museum heist, he was one of the most powerful gangsters in Boston, a very modern, very Bostonian version of Al Capone. Nearly all the major bookkeepers at that time were paying him a cut of their profits. Most of the major drug dealers gave him protection money. And Bulger, as many of you know, also had this deep relationship with the FBI. He basically recruited an FBI agent, John Connolly, into his gang, and Connolly would give Bulger inside information about other gangsters. Washington eventually found out about Bulger in 1995. He went on the run, and he was caught eventually. And I do think that Bulger would not have been someone to actually have committed the Gardner heist. That really just wasn't his style. Way too public, way too open. Rather, his MO was to collect criminal taxes, right? To reach out to criminals who had committed crimes and then ask for a cut. So people have speculated that after the heist, Bulger may have made a few calls, perhaps even collected a few of the paintings. And I just don't think in the end that there's really much evidence of a Bulger connection. Eventually, though, I do believe that I figured out who robbed the museum and uncovered some new evidence that it was Boston gangster David Turner. Next slide, please. This is an image of Turner. Turner, like Bulger, an extremely dangerous man. I believe Turner will go down in Boston history alongside Bulger and Albert DeSalvo. Investigators believed that Turner helped run $1 million cocaine ring, believed that he was behind a half dozen murders. Investigators believe he, in fact, robbed the Bull and Finch pub in Boston, which was the inspiration for the TV show Cheers. As part of my reporting, I talked to the last witness to see the thieves before they entered the museum, and they gave a very specific description of the thieves. They had Asian eyes, as if he had one Asian and one Caucasian parent. And David Turner fits that description. You can see that in this slide here. I also found FBI files that describe how Turner's crime boss, a guy named Carmelo Merlino, twice tried to return the paintings in exchange for a reduced prison sentence. And when I confronted Turner with the evidence, he began to sort of boast. While he denied having any role in the case, he told me that I should put his face on the cover of my book. So where are the paintings today? And that's after all the $5 million questions here. I don't know. I don't know. If I were to speculate, and it's definitely raw speculation, I believe the thieves most likely stashed the paintings in a safe house somewhere outside of Boston, maybe even Maine, and then lost control of the works. That the person who took control of the paintings died or was killed, and the exact location of the works have been lost. This isn't uncommon in art theft. Indeed, often it can take years for works to come back. Stolen paintings will be discovered behind a dishwasher as part of a drug raid, or there someone will bring a looted canvas to Sotheby's to see if you can get it appraised. But you never see these works on the open market. They're far too recognizable, far too well known. That said, there are ways to monetize high profile canvases. On occasion, thieves will try and trade them for drugs or guns. A few years ago, for instance, investigators recovered a Metsu painting pilfered from a mansion in Ireland that was being used as a down payment for a cocaine deal in Istanbul. Another example is after a Titian was swiped from an English country estate. The painting is believed to have passed through the hands of a number of gangsters, each time used as bargaining chip. Sometimes thieves will try and use a work for political favors. This was something that Miles Connor had done. Once, when he was out on bail on art theft charge, he ran into the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston with a gun and ran out again with a Rembrandt painting. He then waited a year and then arranged the return of that painting in order to lessen a prison sentence for a different art crime. But if the works were used in that way, then I think we would have heard about them, and we haven't. Perhaps one thing that is clear is that David Turner himself, man photoed here, does not have access to the paintings. And I'll tell you why. Early on a cold morning in February 1999, Turner was in a red Honda Accord heading to TRC Auto and Electric. And in his car were a bulletproof vest, a police scanner, face masks, 5 semi-automatic handguns, a Ruger M14, and an armed grenade. On that day, Turner was on his way to rob an armored car depot. Now, robbing an armored car depot is better, of course, than robbing armored cars, right? Because all the armored cars are in one place. And if all went well that morning, Turner and his crew would have stolen more than $50 million. That would have been the largest bank heist in the nation's history. All didn't go well. Turner was picked up by the FBI. Now, Turner then claimed entrapment, that the FBI had wanted access to the Gardner paintings via him, and so they created a crime so sweet, so good, that Turner simply couldn't resist. In other words, Turner claims that the FBI had set up this massive sting operation to recover the art. A jury didn't believe Turner, and they found him guilty on all accounts, and the judge sentenced him to 38 years. Now, I believe Turner himself does not have access to the Gardner paintings. He's never been charged with the Gardner heist. He did get out of prison in 2025, this year. And if he had the paintings, I'm sure he would have tried to use them to, reduce his long jail sentence. Investigators often call these paintings a get out of jail free card. This whole issue is complicated by the fact that Turner himself appears to have killed many of the people who participated in the robbery. A government informant once claimed that a man named Lenny DeMuzio was involved in the heist. He was shot to death and stuffed into the trunk of his car. Investigators believe Turner was the triggerman. FBI files indicated that Charlie Pappas could have been one of the thieves. He turned state's evidence against Turner, and he was shot a few days before a trial against Turner. And again, law enforcement widely believe that Turner was behind the murder. And then there's George Reisfelder. Next slide, please. Oh, this is a photo of David Turner. You can see him looking quite similar to the picture of the thieves. Next slide. And George Reisfelder, I was just mentioning, again, looks similar to the composite of the smaller glasses-wearing robber. Same line cheeks, snarl mouth, angular chin. Now, Reisfelder might have been someone to keep the paintings. He had connections at some of the highest political levels. John Kerry once served as Reisfelder's attorney, and he once pushed for Reisfelder to get an early release in a murder case. And since the book has come out, Reisfelder's brother has come out forward and said that he had once seen one of the stolen paintings in Reisfelder's apartment. Reisfelder died a year after the heist, and a number of people believe that Turner had a role in Reisfelder's death. There is also, I should say, a Maine connection as well. There are many leads that have gone all over, but one person who was connected to Davy Turner was another mobster named Bobby Guarenti. Anthony Amore, who's been investigating this case for years, he and the FBI searched his premises to no avail. But when they came back to Guarenti's house in Maine, Elaine admitted that her husband had two of the paintings. And this leads the case to Bobby Gentile, another mobster in Manchester, Connecticut, searched his home a bunch of times, found some circumstantial evidence pointing towards his involvement. Ed Mahoney of the Hartford Courant has really covered that quite closely. But besides all this jumble of names and mobsters, we don't know where the paintings are today. But I do believe that the lost Gardner masterpieces will come back. It might take years, decades, even a century, but sooner or later, the paintings will be returned. In the world of art theft, hope springs eternal for really good reason. Cases often take years to solve. In the 1860s, for instance, Union Army soldiers stole North Carolina's Bill of Rights right out of the state capitol, and the artifact remained missing for 140 years. It popped up in the art underworld a few times until 2003. Two antique dealers tried to peddle the work, and the FBI picked it up in a sting. The public is key, particularly in these types of cases. The public will help solve this case because still someone somewhere knows the location of the art, because someone somewhere knows the identity of the thieves. And despite being 35 years, we still need people to come forward. We need tips, we need leads. Before I wrap up, and really excited to take questions, I want to just sort of revisit what is at stake here, what we're missing, what was really stolen by the thieves. Next slide, please. So, there's the damage that this theft caused to the city of Boston, just really this giant rip in our cultural fabric. And what we can see here with this painting is, well, actually, let me just say one other thing before we go into this painting. What is terrible about this theft, too, is we know that the evidence had an inside collection. The thieves, there was someone inside the museum who gave information to these thieves. We know this because the thieves stayed inside the museum for over an hour. That's a lifetime when you're committing a crime. When David Turner was caught on a wiretape saying that, you're doing a robbery, 3 minutes feels like 3 hours. And the thieves appear to have known about a secret passage in the Dutch room. They know about hidden features of the museum security system, again, strongly suggested of a inside connection. And the tragedy is also heightened. The Gardner Heist tragedy is also heightened by the fact that the museum did not have insurance. This was not unusual for that time and place. Many house museums at that time did not have theft insurance. But the museum did not receive any compensation of any kind for the stolen works. And while I'm really just talking about the tragedy of the theft, I want to underscore what we've lost most is the art. And I've mentioned some of the lesser works, or some of the bigger works that were stolen, but these are really masterpieces. So this is a painting that we've had up here for a moment is Manet's masterpiece Chez Tortoni. Now, Manet is perhaps the first modernist, and he used really turn of the century Paris as his muse. He painted hundreds of these street scenes, women drinking coffee, friends listening to music, young couples flirting. And in Chez Tortoni, this missing painting here, he profiles a man at a cafe table. First glance, the work seems to be sort of an uncomplicated portrait. But the more that you really study it, the man's hard stare, his half-finished beer, it's this examination of the fleeting nature of images, a real snapshot of modern urban life. And this is a key Manet when a reporter called the art historian the morning after the heist and told her of this theft. She simply began crying. Another painting, and again, just revisiting the stakes here. Next slide, please. This is Flink's landscape with an obelisk. Now, when Isabel Stewart Gardner first purchased this landscape in 1900, she believed that this was a Rembrandt. So did Bernard Berenson, her esteemed art dealer. He wrote to her and said it was beyond question the finest of Rembrandt's landscapes. But interestingly, a Harvard University grad student made the discovery that it was a Flink painting just a few years before the heist, uncovering the evidence that Rembrandt's signature on the canvas, you can't quite see it here on this slide, but had been forged by an art dealer. And, Flink was one of Rembrandt's star pupils, and the work remains a perfect example of the genre. It also underscores, the more that you dig, into the art world in general, and even the painting stolen, all of them have somewhat questionable provenances. Even the finial that was stolen was itself a replica. And I think it, just underscores again this mixture of both high and low of crime and art that really continues to make this work such a fascination. And then finally, there's Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Next slide, please. Now, this was a painting from 1633, depicts the miracle of Jesus calming the waves on the Sea of Galilee, as depicted in the fourth chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Now, the story of the Sea of Galilee is to some degree a simple one, maybe familiar to some. During a trip across the Sea of Galilee, a large storm comes up, so large that it threatens to sink the boat after so much water has entered into it. And Jesus is asleep during this trip. And when the storm reaches its height, the boat about to sink, the disciples wake up Jesus because they're terrified for their lives. And Jesus simply calms the sea by saying, "Peace, be still," and then rebukes the disciples for not having sufficient faith. Rembrandt chose the most dramatic moment of the painting, that moment when the painting looks like it really might get sucked up by the sea. And critics have effusively praised the painting for its use of light and dark. And you can really see here, the shadowing that goes diagonally across the painting. It heightens this tension. And it also, this shading, right, where you see cutting across this diagonal here, also emphasizes these underlying themes, the sorting of the faithful from the unfaithful, and how it splits right across the mast. Now, when we take this step back and say, when a painting is stolen, we miss many things. And above all, we miss that remarkable moment when you step in front of a painting and it gives you that wow, that moment of immediacy. And by all accounts, this painting could deliver an impressive wallop. It was just over 5 feet tall, very, very large. And people say that standing in front of him would give this really rush of adrenaline. But when a painting is gone, we miss the details, we miss the subtleties that make the work a masterpiece. And today, even in a good reproduction like this one, it's hard to see the details. One detail in this right here, if you can see my arrow here, is that Rembrandt pasted a ghost ship there, and in reproductions like this, you can't really see it. The other thing, what is missing in a when a painting like this goes missing, is that Rembrandt himself created himself as a self-portrait. You can see him right here. And what's interesting is that he is at his time when he painted this in his late 20s. This is his first seascape. And he paints himself as one of Jesus's disciples. I mean, it's just crazy to me that the audacity of a painter like that. And if you look closely at this in reproductions, you can do it. He's looking really straight out at the viewer. And I feel like he's almost just saying, like, look at me. Can you see what I can do? As for the Gardner Museum itself, security has improved. They've created this big expansion. But if you go to the museum, next slide, please. If you go to the museum today, and you go up to the second floor, you can see the empty frames hanging on the wall. Because of Gardner's will, the frames cannot be moved. And on one side, I think these frames appear empty and lifeless, sad and tragic, but I believe that they're also just waiting again to be filled with the missing art. I wanted to pause for a moment and take any questions that people had, and yeah, eager to answer them in any way.
Thank you, Ulrich. That was great. We do have indeed some questions from the audience. Um, how would, let's see, how would these thieves trust each other, that any other painting was actually real?
Uh, uh, can you ask the question again, Kathleen?
Yeah, how would these thieves trust each other that any painting was actually, so I guess I'm imagining they're asking like in the world where these are maybe used as bargaining chips or going back and forth between um different people in the
Yeah,
art world underground. Um how is it trusted that kind of you're like, oh sure, you've got the paintings, from the
yeah,
Gardner Heist. Um
yeah. That's a great question. And I see another question in here about whether the paintings will be destroyed, could have been destroyed. Let me answer the first one. So, when we look at the evidence of the thieves who went through the museum, I think there's a lot of evidence just given by the confidence that they went through this museum, the paths that they took. So, occasionally as they just moved through the museum, one went in one room, another one in another room. They seem to be experienced thieves. I suspect, if I'm right, that it was David Turner and George Reisfelder. Whether it was them or another pair, they were quite experienced, and then would have done other robberies. And what is the thing that creates trust? It's reciprocity. In other words, you do things and trade multiple times. So I think, and we can talk more about the security, but I do think that they had a close relationship. I don't think they knew much about art itself. And so, they stole one painting. It was de-attributed from Rembrandt to Flink. I think when they stole it, they believed it to be a Rembrandt. But there's all sorts of evidence that, for not stealing sort of Titian, that is a much more valuable painting for some of the, frankly, just knickknacks that they stole. Really did not know much about art. So, certainly they couldn't have, trusted the pieces. There's this question from DJ Stanhope in the chat, and certainly put in other into the chat. And it seems like, Kathleen, you have some other questions.
yeah.
Could the paintings have been destroyed? Certainly, I think there's sort of two questions. Have the paintings suffered any type of damage? I think the answer to that is yes. Cutting the Rembrandts out of their frames, likely sort of rolling them up, would have caused, some damage to these paintings. If they are, as I believe, kind of stashed behind a dishwasher or an attic somewhere in the New England area, you know, paintings need to be kept, certainly, masterpieces like this should be kept at constant humidity and temperature. And I think, as we all know, an area like Maine or Boston gets very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter, particularly bad for these types of paintings. But in the same way that most people will not sort of, set a 20 or $100 bill on fire, I don't think that the thieves who stole this would have purposefully destroyed these, because they stole them because they're valuable. In the same way that, we don't destroy currency, I don't think that they would have actively destroyed them. And it's never, when we look at the case, immediately afterwards, just say the first 10 to 20 years, it does not seem that thieves were so close to being caught that they needed
Sure.
to split them.
Is David Turner still around? Someone's asking.
Yeah, David Turner is still around. He got out of prison in 2025. There is some evidence that he may have gotten out early by using the Gardner heist to negotiate. I have no strong evidence of that, except that he did get out 7 years early on this heist. David Turner was very young at the time that the heist occurred. So if he participated, I think he would have been someone to steal them. But then you know, you then quickly get into this cluster of criminals, and it kind of becomes this mesh of names. So, you could create this diagram, if you will. But the person at the top of that diagram would have a guy named Carmelo Morlino. He owned TRC Auto Body and Electric. He was also close to Bobby Guarenti. He ran we ran both the auto body shop and this, cocaine ring out of that auto body shop. So, you know, I somewhere in that mesh of people, I think is where the painting sort of went. And then, one, it's 35 years. Criminals are not the, most long living of individuals, right? So people could have just died, and the same way that many of us will, die of old age. And then there's a lot of evidence, that David Turner shot other people in this network. Now, where the paintings moved within that, did Bobby Guarenti really have to? Did Reisfelder have them? How did they make it down to Connecticut? I think, then we're really kind of going on the edge of evidence, and then you just have, one person saying, I may have seen the paintings. That's not the best evidence in the world.
Sure. If you visit the Gardner Museum today, is there information on this story there when you visit?
Yeah, so the museum interestingly has a very mixed approach to the theft. On one side, they've hired this investigator, or excuse me, the head of security there now, Anthony Amore, has really devoted himself to the case. If you have any tips or leads, I would suggest that, or any ideas, happy to, you can reach out to me. I can introduce you to him, or reach out to him. So very dedicated to getting the paintings back, but they've also been very careful not to make the museum just sort of a little bit of a sideshow of a
Mm,
heist. And so if you go up to the Dutch room, there is a small notice about what happened. But if you go in the gift shop, for instance, there is not a lot, on the theft itself. It's not like they're selling, books on this, or that they don't sell my book, for instance. That they haven't
sure.
tried to really sort of monetize the theft, and I think it's
Mhm,
it's a hard road for them to do right. There's another question I have here in the chat, Kathleen.
mhm.
Did the thieves in any way have a shopping list, or did their selection seem totally random? I would I like the Ancient Ant is the person who asked this. So Ancient Ant, it's a great question. What I would say is that I'd divide up the paintings into two. One is, excuse me, I would divide up the paintings or the artwork stolen into two buckets. I think there's one bucket where the thieves, went in there and they, were targeting Vermeer and Rembrandts. And I think it would make sense to do that. Those are fairly well-known names. And so they went to the Dutch room, one of the first rooms they went in, and took those paintings. And then there's a second group of works stolen, like the finial, like the coup, where the thieves went into the museum. Once they knew that the guards had been subdued, they basically had run of the whole place, right? They knew that they could have stayed there until, early morning. They had over an hour, which is really crazy by by any estimation. And then they stole these other items that do seem to use ancient ants, totally random, right? Things that like a small child would steal because they sort of fit in their pocket. The finial, where they had to would have clambered on top of a kind of a bookshelf, so to speak, would have clambered up something to steal it, was a really random theft. It was only discovered by the museum a few days later. So, the day after they find the big paintings missing, and then someone said, apparently, or it would be my guess, what, what happened at the top of that flagpole. So, these other items really just, yeah, seem like something like a kid would have done, in a candy shop, rather than, one would think of these kind of professional thieves.
It sounds like, Ulrich, this is a case that you still follow. Do you continue to write about it or, keep up with what's going on?
I certainly keep up with what's going on. There was a while right after the book came out, and you know, where I was really just sort of running down lots of leads. What but now day to day, I really, I'll answer a lead if it's really, seems promising. And really commend, Amore at the museum. He's also written some books. FBI continues to run down cases, but after 35 years, it's one, it's hopeful that the works will come back, but there are not that many leads that seem
Hmm.
really promising.
Someone is asking in the chat, have people like yourself or Mr. Smith received any threats because you get involved in investigating this? Or, I mean, it also seems like David Turner was happy to talk to you. So,
Yeah, I mean, there were people who sort of would be vaguely threatening. When I was working on the case, it was still like 20 years afterwards. And so, many of these thieves were sort of, in their 40s and 50s, and far less threatening than they were in, the prime of their
mm,
career. Someone like Miles Connor in his 20s, incredibly threatening individual. When I spoke to him, he was in his 50s, had a slight bit of dementia. So, literally, some people would threaten, certainly Harold Smith, who was working far more active cases, dealt a lot more with that. Now, he was an insurance adjuster. So, as part of that work, he's less law enforcement, but, does sit on potential money, which is where, um, people were threatened.
and it sounds like a couple people are asking, this, it doesn't sound like you buy the idea that some wealthy person was behind this, like who had a very specific, I want you to get this, and this, and then they're going to go into my private collection.
Yeah, I mean, if you can take anything from this talk, my personal view is that there is no incredibly wealthy person who will have a Rembrandt stolen. And let's sort of unpack a little bit what that means.
Mm,
Do wealthy people buy paintings of questionable history and provenance? Absolutely. You could buy, works looted by the Nazis, but there you have some plausible deniability, right? That the work um you
so
have
maybe it was
plausible
lost in
deniability.
a war. So,
Yeah,
oh,
there's some.
yeah, right.
And then, there are people who will steal much lower end artifacts, which are much easier to make money off of, but they're not, world famous like a Klimt
Mm,
or a Rembrandt. And if you're a really wealthy person, are you really willing to go to prison, for a type of painting like this? Every once in a while you see some sort of hints of this, but we've never really found what we see so often in the movie, right? This Pierce Brosnan type.
right,
And I think
right.
that's just a myth. What I do think is that Pierce Brosnan type does inspire thieves to steal art.
Mm.
They're hoping that they can find this, rich oil chic. But, to my mind, to my knowledge, excuse me, we've never seen one.
So what do you think the hold is on us that this particular, it's it's the biggest, the one that's worth the most money, but beyond like the record-breaking aspect, if you will, of this theft. Um, why can't we stop, thinking about it, wondering about it, writing and reading books about it? What is this hold this story like has on our imagination? What do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. What's funny here, Kathleen, is that, I'm gracious that you invited me here to talk, but all I offer is theories, right? I don't know where
There,
these paintings are. This is
right,
just a
right.
mystery. So, all the people who've joined us today, any theory to some degree is just as valid as
Yep.
what I have. And I
Hmm.
think really what I'm saying here is that the mystery is at the kind of core of this, and it is what
Hmm.
attracts people because one, they can project their own interests into it, their own theories. And, when things are unsolved, when they're undone, they also allow for that type of kind of searching, that hunt that gives purpose. And, I spoke about the Vermeer early on. And, I think when you think about, what distinguishes really a masterpiece from, a drawing that my kid made, it is that kind of mystery that sits underneath it, right? The
Hmm.
way that you can continually ask questions of it, the way that you can continually come back to it and wonder what really happened here, what really is going on, and that type of openness, I think, whether it's in the art itself or this case, is what brings people. I'd say that is one big thing. There is another little aspect of it, which is just the museum itself, where
Hmm.
if people visit Boston, they go to the museum as kids, they remember the empty frames. You go back to that museum because of Isabella Stewart Gardner's will. Nothing has ever changed, and so you return to this place so beautiful, so enchanting, and yet it has this kind of dark side to it. And I think it speaks broader to our fascination with sort of the way beauty and crime kind of involve each other,
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
upstairs, downstairs sort of feel to it that feels, quite Bostonian, and
Hmm.
I think continues to really attract people.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Um, Ulrich's book, The Gardner Heist, is available through Maine Historical Society, our museum store. So I shared that link in the chat. But if you visit shop.mainehistory.org, you can find the book there and others that we've got available. Anything else that you'd like to say before we close this afternoon, Ulrich?
No, this has been fantastic. As much as we can say, if you have any tips, reach out to me, reach out to the museum, reach out to the FBI. Do hope that these paintings will eventually be returned.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks so
And
much.
thank you everyone again for joining us.